Morning, everyone. I want to thank you first, and I said thanks to Pete for adjusting the schedule. We have a series of votes called at 10, and I was pretty clearly going to miss my scheduled time, so I was able to adjust and trample on your first morning break. So thanks for letting me come and having a chance to visit. I want to talk briefly and then open it up and take questions. I'm pleased to follow Randy Forbes. Randy's a good friend, and we work really closely together. The Virginia delegation of 13, 2 senators and 11 members of Congress worked pretty well across the aisle, and Randy's leadership on these issues and on the House side are critical, and we work closely together. What I'd like to do is just maybe talk about 3 things. First, I'm a new senator, so sort of what I'm focused on, and a little bit about my observations of the institution a year in. I'll do that quickly. Second, I want to talk about some strategic challenges we have. I do believe, and I've heard Randy say it, that the next decade is going to be a decade for the Navy, and I really do believe that. I want to talk about why, but also some strategic concerns I have, even about the way we articulate policies, a little bit about how we message the policy strategic direction that we're focusing. And then finally, I want to talk a little bit about the budget issue, because I'm a budget conferee, and so we're in the hopefully closing phases of a budget conference that I think will offer some certainty to our military and to our private economy. But I'm also working on the NDAA as a armed services member, and I'll talk a little bit about kind of work on both of those priorities right now. So first, the job 11 months in. I'm thrilled to be in the Senate. There's a lot of senators who are kind of in the unhappiness caucus. In fact, when I was running and I had my editorial board interview with the Washington Post, what they said to me is, why do you want to join the unhappiness caucus? And what they meant was former governors who are in the Senate often don't like it. They are used to being at the top of whatever their pyramid is, and then they come into a Senate and you're told you're number 95 in seniority, and they haze you for the first 14 or 16 years that you're there. But actually, I've really enjoyed it, and largely because the committee assignments I've drawn are ones that I feel very, very passionately about. To be a Virginian and on armed services in the Senate is just like nothing else. I mean, it is such a spectacular opportunity. Now, I have the challenge of, for 36 years before me, the Virginian and Armed Services was both a decorated combat veteran and a Secretary of the Navy. I didn't serve in the military, and if I'd been Secretary of the Navy, I think I would have remembered it. But so John Warner and Jim Webb left big shoes to follow. But I care passionately about our armed services issues. I have a son in the military, a son who's a lieutenant in the Marine Corps, and there's only about 2 or 3 of us in the Senate who do. So these are issues that don't just matter to me as a patriotic American and a Virginian, they matter to me as a father. Being on foreign relations is also fantastic, because every hearing we have in armed services, we have the same hearing in foreign relations from a different perspective. American strength, as you all know, isn't just military strength. We have to balance military strength with diplomatic strength, economic strength, strength of our moral example. When we're at our best, we balance those 4 spheres. And the great thing about being on both armed services and foreign relations is it gives me sort of the 360 view. And finally, on the Budget Committee, I come into a Senate that has had a real troubled record. We hadn't passed a budget in 4 years when I came into the Senate in January. There hasn't been a successful budget conference in a divided Congress since 1986. And so I came in as a mayor and governor who'd done an awful lot of budgets, and really didn't want to be on the Budget Committee, frankly, because of the track record. But when I was assigned to that committee, we've worked very diligently to get a budget passed by the 23rd of March, to make continuous efforts to get that budget into conference. And now that we're in conference, I hope that we're going to be able to come up with something, and I'll come back to that in a second. So anyway, I'm really enjoying the challenge thus far, and many of you, I have worked closely with your companies, and I've worked very closely with DOD, Secretary Mabus, and others. Of course, Virginia is pro-military. We're more connected to the military than any other state. I will state that in a room proudly with senators from anywhere, and if they challenge me, my evidence will be, first, our map is a map of American military history between Yorktown and Appomattox and so many other Civil War sites in the Pentagon where 9/11 happened. Our map of Virginia is a map of the American military history. We are more connected in people. 1 in 9 Virginians is a veteran, but if you add to that the numbers that are active duty, Guard and Reserve, DOD civilian, DOD contractor, the shipbuilders at the Huntington Ingalls shipyard that build carriers and nuclear subs, and the families of all of the above, you're now not talking 1 in 9, you're talking probably 1 in 3 Virginians have a direct connection to the military. So we are very, very pro-military, both in our history and who we are today in our people. But if there's a first among equals in Virginia, it's the Navy. We are a Navy state. We care deeply about the maritime industry, and we played a critical role in it since the beginning of the nation. The greatest concentration of naval power of the greatest Navy in the history of the world is in Virginia. And our private contractors, whether it's the shipbuilders at Huntington Ingalls or the great ship repairers that work at ship repair, private ship repair companies like BAE in Hampton Roads, we are deeply connected with the mission. I do believe when the President rolled out a military strategy a couple years ago and said, this is going to be a decade where we're really going to focus on the Navy, I believe it. This is a world that needs flexible force more than fixed force. That's my term. That's not anybody else's term. But obviously the challenges change and they adjust and they pop up in one corner of the world and then they pop up in another. And the way to address those challenges is to have force that is flexible and expeditionary more than fixed force. And so that is perfect for the Navy. My son is a Marine, an expeditionary force. I think the Marines are really returning to that very focused expeditionary mission after the ground wars in Iraq and Afghanistan, or Afghanistan now drawing down. And the way to have that flexible force is through a vigorous program of shipbuilding and naval assets that can be deployed here or there, depending on what the circumstances are. So, as a strategic matter, I think this will be a good time for the Navy going forward. I'm going to get to the budget challenges in a minute, but as a strategic matter, it's going to be a very important time for the Navy. I was in Bahrain over the weekend at an international security dialogue that takes place there every year, largely run by our Gulf state Arab allies, but with a lot of other nations participating. And when I was in Bahrain, I visited the Fifth Fleet and visited with Norfolk-based crew on the San Jacinto, which was there in dock when I was there. And that was a very powerful opportunity to see what this flexible force means. I said I was going to offer a thought about our current strategy. I think it's really important to focus on the Navy as a flexible force that can respond anywhere. I don't like the term, however, rebalancing to Asia. I don't like a pivot to Asia or rebalancing to Asia, and I'm going to tell you why. The Asian threats are significant. The announcement recently in China demonstrates how significant it is, and we know that we have some work to do there, and we're trying to adjust not only our military strategy, but even some of our trade strategies, like the negotiation of the Trans-Pacific Partnership, to recognize the challenges that we will face as a nation in Asia. But I've been to 2 international forums in the last month, one largely with Europe-based NATO allies, and then the second one in the Middle East, where our allies who are not in Asia say, well, what about us? Are you withdrawing? Are you pulling away? Are you abandoning us? The abandonment word was used both by European NATO allies and some of the Gulf state allies there at the conference in Bahrain. And so what I tend to focus on is the more our force is truly flexible, the more we can be where we need to be and respond where we need to respond wherever it is. Too many people hear a rebalancing to Asia and an Asia pivot, and they think of national security strategy as a zero-sum game. If somebody's going to get more, that means somebody's going to get less. Are we the ones that are going to get less? And it's interesting, even in regions of the world where folks are often critical of what the United States does, as soon as you suggest that we may have less of a presence, then they really get critical. Then they decide how much they want you to stay there. I was challenged by some of our colleagues from Gulf state allies this weekend about the abandonment by America of the region. And I told them, well, militarily, go across the street and see the Fifth Fleet. Diplomatically, look at the energetic efforts we're making with respect to Iran and Syria and Israel-Palestine. Right now, we're diplomatically more engaged than we've ever been. Look at the statistics about trade and foreign direct investment. We're increasing our economic outreach into the region. So the abandonment theory is wrong. But I challenged them. I said, remember, we were willing militarily to keep a presence in Iraq, but Iraq didn't want us to. And we're willing to keep a military presence ongoing in Afghanistan post-2014, but we have a president of Afghanistan who's calling us occupiers and suggests that we leave. We derive a message from that, too, about whether you want us here or not. And that was a novel concept to a lot of people when I mentioned it, but I could see that they thought about it and understood, okay, there is a more complex story than the U.S. is abandoning the region. But I would encourage all of us, frankly, as we're talking about strategy going forward, remember that talking about a rebalance or pivot to Asia sounds like a zero-sum game to anybody who doesn't live in Asia, any of our allies that aren't in Asia. That's not to underestimate the challenges that we have in Asia, especially with China, or to underestimate our need to come up with creative strategies to deal with it. The good news is the Navy can respond to those challenges. And whether it's positioning assets in Bahrain and elsewhere to make sure that sea lanes stay open in that critical part of the world, to make sure that we have that credible military threat near Iran that is necessary if we're to accomplish our goal of depriving Iran of nuclear weapons, and hopefully that will be through a diplomatic solution, but the diplomatic solution will only happen if there's that credible military threat. So wherever we need to be, we can be there, and the Navy is critical to that. Let me say a word now or two about sort of the status of the budget discussions, and then I'll conclude and open it up and take some questions. I always say this, I can tell you what I observe, but because I'm too new, you may not be able to trust my interpretation. I can see things and I can tell you how I interpret it, but I'm still learning my way around. I'm optimistic about finding a budget deal, finding a budget deal that is a good, solid deal. That's not the comprehensive deal I might like, but that is a good, solid deal that provides some certainty, and I want to spend some time talking about what certainty would mean to the Navy, to the military, and to the nation. When I was put on the budget committee, I did not ask to be on the budget committee, as I said, because I was worried that they were not doing heavy lifts, and I'm not interested in being on a committee that's not working. But there was a new committee chair, Patty Murray. She had been the Veterans Committee chair, but chose to switch over to budget. I don't think she switched committees to come to a committee and not do anything. So my observation was the fact that she gave up an important committee for budget told me she wanted to make the budget committee important. A number of new people were put on the budget committee, and when we all started to agitate, let's get back to normal order budgeting, because we've tried everything else, sequester, CR, super committees, they've all been big failures. They've all imposed significant costs, not only on the economy, but on our military and our national defense. Let's get back to doing it the way the Budget Act of 1974 says we should. President proposes a budget, Congress tackles it early in the year, giving the appropriators the guidance then to write appropriations bills that can kick us in on October 1 with a fiscal year budget. And so I started to agitate with others to do a budget, and we did pass a budget on the 23rd of March in the Senate, and it's a budget that is somebody who's done a lot of budgets. If the Senate budget were implemented without changing an apostrophe or a comma, it would be good for the economy, and it would do a credible job in helping us reduce our deficit over the course of a number of years, not landing immediately in an economy that's still too anemic, but the one that would help us deal with our deficit over the long haul. I view it as incredibly important that we do budgeting in the normal order to give certainty to our Pentagon and to our broader economy. The best state of affairs is this. The ideal state of affairs is that you would have a strategy that would drive your budget. The distant second is you would let your budget drive your strategy. The far distant third, and we're in the far distant third right now, is you would let your budgetary inaction and indecision drive your strategy. And that's where America is right now. Secretary Hagel said to me recently, I don't have a budget number, I don't know when I'll have a budget number, and I don't know what the rules will be about the budget number I get when I eventually get it. And that's a horrible thing to do to a military apparatus charged with keeping the nation safe in a world that, by most accounts, is getting more dangerous and more complicated. That's what congressional budgetary inaction has done. We've had so many hearings on armed services where we've asked questions of witnesses in the different service branches and in SecDef's kind of umbrella operation about the effect of sequester on their operations. And again, these witnesses come up and talk to us about the negative effect. These effects are real, and they're debilitating. They're debilitating in the short term, and they're also morale busters in the long term. When you furlough great DOD employees that are nurses, at the Wounded Warrior Hospital at Fort Belvoir, or you give warn notices to ship repairers who are doing the important work in Hampton Roads of keeping our ships, fit for service and fit for battle, and you kind of cause them to, threaten that their livelihoods would be threatened, and you take their mind off 100% on the mission because now they're worried about whether they're going to keep being able to pay their mortgage or their kids' college expenses, you hurt our national defense. And broadly, you hurt the economy, because even outside of the defense space, as you know, the absence of certainty makes a whole lot of people decide not to make decisions on investments, not to make decisions about hiring people, because they're waiting for certainty. But I can tell you this, I think the motives are there both in the Senate and in the House now, and especially in the chairs of the two budget committees that are working to find a deal. I think there's a recognition that it's time we give some certainty to the military about budgeting. We give some certainty to the nation about what the state of affairs will be for the next couple of years. You've probably read, you know, a little bit about what a deal might be. It won't be the grand bargain that I would hope to vote for one day that would do some significant reform of the unnecessarily Byzantine, complex, and inefficient tax expenditures, part of the tax code, and also find meaningful reforms of some of our entitlement programs, especially Medicare, which do need to be reformed. I hope to one day cast a vote on a grander bargain and a bigger deal that will deal with both. This is not going to be that deal, partly because on the tax, there's sort of a trade. If Republicans will tackle the tax expenditure side, Democrats will tackle the entitlements side. But really, before the budget conference even started, on the tax expenditure side, there was an effort underway both by Senate Finance and House Ways and Means to take that issue separately and do a meaningful exploration of tax reform. As soon as that was put into a different track, it was unlikely that the Dems, for example, were going to do meaningful things on the entitlement programs right now and then wait and see later what would happen on tax expenditures. They really need to happen at the same time. That said, while the budget deal is not going to be the grand bargain, it is, we're shooting for a deal that would provide 2 years of certainty. A budget for the remainder and appropriations bills for the remainder of FY14 and also for FY15. If we could do that, remember last year we didn't do appropriations bills till March. If we could, in December or January, it would be January in the appropriations bills, get appropriations bills done for all of 14 and 15, that would be a very significant step forward. It actually moves towards something that I and others on the Budget Committee promote. We believe the federal government ought to have a 2-year budget, like most states do. You know, do a 2-year budget and then in the middle of the year, oversight, analysis, truing it up, you know, more in-depth kind of investigation of the right budgetary trends. There's a number of us, and it's very bipartisan, who believe that's a preference. If we can do this format the way we're looking at it now and do it in a 2-year fashion, it can move us that direction, which would be a good budgetary reform for the nation. But I do feel pretty good about the chances. It's going to come out in real time in the next couple of days. You're likely to see a report from the chairs. And I think if it was just up to the chairs at this point, the deal is about 5 minutes away. But they each have to have a deal they can sell in their respective bodies to their the two parties in each body, and that's challenging. What the deal will do for defense, let me just focus on that, is take the sequester, which in this fiscal year has an additional $20 billion dip that kicks in January 15, and smooth that out. So there won't be that additional $20 billion dip, and it will add some money in to make sure that there's not a dip in the non-defense accounts called for by sequester as well. How that adding that money back in gets allocated by the line items within the service branches, that's more for the appropriators than us, but our job on the Budget Committee is to make sure that the top line number is one that is not harmful to national defense, but one that we can live with. We would also like, if we can buttress that number up, to provide more flexibility so that the military can make determinations about that are strategy-based and priority-based rather than just across-the-board cuts as they're sort of programming that money for the next 2 years. So I'm optimistic about it. We're also working on the NDAA. At year end, no reason we shouldn't have been able to tackle it earlier. We worked very, very hard to get that out of the Armed Services Committee in June. It was by an overwhelmingly bipartisan vote for a series of reasons. It's not been on the floor, but we are working on it, and the goal would be for the House to put in a bill that they would pass and get over to us and that we would then tackle. I give the chairs of the two Armed Service Committees credit, because what they've done is essentially, without yet a Senate-passed NDAA, they've pre-conferenced the two bills and found an accord that both majority and minority leadership in both houses says we're going to be fine with. So stay tuned on that as well. With that, I really appreciate the chance to just come and offer a few words. And Pete, I don't want to get too far out of the way in terms of your next speaker, but I'm glad to take some questions.
A couple of questions, sir. I'll
yep.
a quick one, because of you being from Virginia, you mentioned space. You've talked about the need to be strategically informed, get strategy before plans.
Right.
Can you talk about that?
Yeah, the need for certainty is not just our military planners. You hate it when you take your planning apparatus that should be focused long-term on threats and you tie up all their time with, well, let's see, how can we get through the next 3 months before the shutdown, and what do we do if sequester happens? We're taking all of our planning energy and we're making them devote their planning expertise to a lower order priority, not a highest and best use forward focus kind of planning. Exactly the same thing happens with our industrial base. I was not only in Bahrain last week, but I was at the BAE shipyard down in Newport News. I have probably spent more time trying to master acquisition of new than the repair of the existing during my first 10 or 11 months in the Senate, and so I'm now trying to come up to speed on sort of the ship repair side of it and not just the new construction side. So I was down at BAE, and they were sharing with me the challenges they have as that critical part of the industrial base. When we went into sequester and then furlough and then shutdown earlier this year, they've issued all kinds of warn notices to their employees. And then it turned out that they didn't have to lay folks off, but they were worried that they would. Now, if you are working in an industrial, highly complex manufacturing environment where safety is goal one, and every day, everything you're doing, you're thinking safety, 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 and then all of a sudden you get a warn notice, and so part of your mind is operated with, man, I don't know, what if I get laid off? What's that going to do? Can I pay the mortgage? Can I pay the bill? You don't want people doing this work, working with a part of their brain focused on real existential worries about whether they're going to continue to have a job tomorrow. And so that sent all kinds of weird tremors through all of the ship repair industry down in Hampton Roads. And we just can't keep doing that to people. We can't keep doing it to people. So this, for purposes of the planning, it's very important to have certainty, but also for the purposes of the quality of the work and the morale. And you know, it's important that we promote and celebrate our warfighters. But I'll tell you, when I was down at BAE, 2 ships were in this massive double dry dock they have, the Iwo Jima and the Wasp. And I talked to the repairers who were working on them. And the COs, Navy COs of both of the ships came up to me and said, hey, these guys are our partners. These BAE employees, they may not be, you know, wearing the uniform active duty military, but they are our partners and they're integral to the mission just like one of my crew is. And I thought that was interesting that unprompted the COs talked about the private ship repair employees as their integral partners. And we need to tell that story, and you know, up here and with the public, that it's the warfighters are critical, and those who support the warfighting mission are just as critical.
Yes, sir. Thank you. Other questions, Senator?
Yeah, please. Okay.
I've heard a little bit of talk about sort of top-line thing, numbers of ships and things like that. I know it's a much smaller part of the budget, but could you comment at all about technology and the stream from R&D to procurement to deployment?
It's I'm not going to be able to offer a whole lot of specifics budgetarily on that, but I will say this is something that the Virginians, Mark Warner and I, we really care deeply about. You know, of course, an awful lot of the technology and R&D investments within the defense space have a strong Virginia presence. DARPA and Geospatial Intelligence Agency down on the Fort Belvoir campus, and we see the value those investments have had, not only within making our nation safer, but they've created all kinds of other private sector opportunities. You know, what we notice, I did a funny deal when I was governor. You know, the governors do economic development deals, and I put $10 million of economic development money into trying to help DARPA bring all their various tentacles into Virginia. And so I got challenged by some of my legislators. Hey, this is a government agency. You know, we usually put economic development money into a company that's going to produce X jobs and pay X taxes. DARPA doesn't pay taxes. I said, yeah, but let me tell you something. DARPA, being center of gravity in Arlington, is going to create a whole lot of spin-off economic activity that will be very strong for us. And it didn't take too much explanation before the folks who were the most skeptical said, yeah, you're right, we should do this. So to do an economic development deal, essentially to keep DARPA in, Virginians really understand the value of research, both to the defense mission and in their spin-off economic activity as well. We've hurt research funding very significantly through sequester. We've hurt it because anything that's not directly connected to the warfighting mission tends to take more of a haircut. If you look beyond the defense at agencies like the NIH, CDC, look what's happened to their research budgets. They have been cut very, very dramatically. R&D is still one of the areas where America has a strategic edge. It's harder to get a strategic edge in an area you don't have it than to hold on to it when you do have it. We have a strategic edge in higher education in this country. No country can match us. We have a strategic edge in R&D. No country can match it. We shouldn't be hampering our strengths. We should be enhancing our strengths. And so, the better we can do on the top line number, the better we'll be on that. But I can't give you much more specifics now about what, sort of R&D funding might look like in 14 or 15. Yeah, please. And then I'm going to come here. There was a question right here, please.
Hi, Sidney Friedberg, Breaking Defense. You're dropping hints of guarded optimism, but how guarded is your optimism that a budget deal, A, that a deal actually happens before the new year, B, that it is this, not comprehensive, but 2-year livable deal, and 3, that besides your stability, you actually can bring those sequester cuts to defense way down. I mean, can you give odds in very rough terms about your levels of confidence in those?
Well, I will say, so I think you're right. You've interpreted right that I'm guardedly optimistic. I'm actually completely optimistic, and the guarded part is just that I'm new enough that I don't know, am I seeing the reality or am I seeing the shadows on the wall? I'm still wondering that 10 or 11 months into the Senate. There are some theatrical skirmishes and kabuki-like element to this, and I have not yet completely honed my ability to determine is it real or is it Memorex. I'm optimistic, and again for a number of reasons. I mean, look at the 2 chairs of the budget committees. Patty Murray was the co-chair of the super committee that came up with a goose egg. Patty Murray, if you know her, very competitive person in all the right senses. She's a very competitive person. I don't think she's, when I see her act on this, I don't think she wants to be the chair of a budget conference that we've been waiting to have one for a very long time and have it come up blank. Paul Ryan is a national leader and wants to be seen as a national leader, and this effort coming up blank's not going to help him either. So if you begin with who's leading the effort in each side, and then what's the alternative? The alternative is CRs. Nobody likes that. The alternative, what? Another battle about government shutdown? One side tried that a couple months ago, and it worked out to their grave disadvantage. I don't think they want to do it again. So there's some institutional factors that I can look at in addition to my own just sort of belief that we ought to be able to work it out. And finally, this is almost heretical to say, we're not that far apart. We're not that far apart. The top lines in the budget between $1.058 trillion and $967 billion, it's $91 billion. And that's a lot of money, but the federal budget is $3.6 trillion. $91 billion is essentially about 2.5%. And the Senate wrote a budget knowing that in a negotiation it would get lower, and the House wrote a budget knowing that in a negotiation it would get higher. So the real difference isn't 2.5%. The real difference is probably 1.5%. So you can't tell me that for the good of the nation and for the good of the economy, Congress can't close a difference of 1.5%. State legislatures do it all the time. My 2 legislative branches in Virginia would do different budgets that would be different by that magnitude or more, and we would close them. So I refuse to believe that members of Congress are less competent than the members of the 49 bicameral state legislatures in this country. So, please.
Yeah, I have a question. You talked about flexible assets. One flexible asset of the Navy is the Aegis missile system. And I recently listened to High Frontier, and they were saying that the Achilles heel of the United States was the Gulf Coast. And it was threats from missiles coming from the
Interesting.
south.
Interesting.
Venezuela or around the South Pole. And they suggest putting the Aegis at Eglin Air Force Base in a fixed location, just as they do in Eastern Europe.
Right.
What do you think the proper balance is of naval air assets and Air Force assets when it comes to strategic defense?
Well, it clearly is the case on the flexible versus fixed force. I've been given a pro-Navy speech. The Air Force can make the same case. So air assets, Aegis missile, all aviation assets are also helpful. They often need to be fixed in terms of they have to land every once in a while, but the nice thing about aviation assets of all kinds and missiles is that you can flex them around. I will say most of the strategic discussion that we've been having about missile defense in armed services is sort of West Coast, East Coast, and we haven't had a lot of discussions about vulnerabilities from the South side. That's a point that as soon as you make it, makes me think, yeah, that's something to be concerned about. But I will say, at least in hearings on sort of missile vulnerabilities and strengths, we've not spent a lot of time on that in any hearings that I have been part of. Obviously, the Aegis system, I was on the San Jacinto as an Aegis class, and working, I'll just take that as an encouragement to spend a little more time looking at that as a potential vulnerability and solution. Maybe one more question? And no, I think we're probably.
I think we're going to have to, we've got the
Okay,
speaker.
next speaker up. Right, hey, thanks, good to be with you.
Sure, I want to give you this one book. Senator, thank you for coming over today. I know you're very busy. You've got to get back for a vote. But we think you should have in your office the Naval Institute Guide to Ships and Aircraft of the U.S. Fleet. Thank you for what you're doing for us on the Hill every day.
Look forward to taking that.
Thank you, sir.
Yeah, thank you very much.